In this video, we'll go over the most important things to keep in mind before you buy your freeze dryer. The first thing to consider is the power that you're going to need for the machine that you choose to get. Now with a large machine, you're going to have a different power outlet, so be sure to check with your electrician. Before you buy your freeze dryer or before you decide even which size to get, be sure if you're thinking about the large to look at the options available for your electricity and how to replace those electrical outlets for the different type of outlet that it needs, because it's not the standard 3-prong plug that you can just plug into any of your outlets. So you'll need to get a quote from your electrician before you purchase your machine, just to make sure that it's exactly what you need and that you have the money set aside in order to redo the electrical should you need to do that. You may actually need to run new power lines, but you might also be able to use the current existing lines, or you might have to add a whole new power socket if it's not in the right area that you need it to be to match up with your freeze dryer. You might even discover, unfortunately, that your house might be too old to have a freeze dryer. The houses that were built before 1950, a lot of them just have the 2 prongs. So you may have to actually upgrade your entire electrical panel before you can get something like this installed, because you may be completely out of power. You may not have an option to add a new breaker to your power panel, and that can get quite expensive. So you might want to go ahead and double check on that first before you get your machine. This applies to all sizes, large, medium, or small. Now the medium is one of the reasons I chose it is because it has the regular plug outlet. It's also going to be on a circuit that we already have existing, and I know that we don't have a whole lot of power run off of it. And that is another reason why we chose to put the freeze dryer here in this room rather than putting it in with the kitchen or the laundry room. Number 2 is to purchase or repurpose something in your house that can hold the freeze dryer. So it does need to be sturdy. These are really heavy machines, and you'll need to make sure that the structure is strong enough to hold your machine. So where I found mine was on Facebook Marketplace, and it took me several weeks to find this particular one because I was looking for something very specific. That might even help you decide which size machine you want, knowing that you don't want something too heavy that you may not be able to lift. Now this is the medium. One of my specific needs was that I needed a place underneath a cabinet that I was able to lock, and I kind of found something and I had to modify it a little bit to suit my needs. I also needed my machine to be high enough off the ground. You can see here it's about the same height as me, a little bit taller. I needed it to be high off the ground because this screen right here is a touch screen. And so if my littles were able to push their chairs up to the machine, they would be able to get into that. They'd be able to open this, and I just did not want to deal with any of that. So I went ahead and got something that was really tall so they couldn't reach that even if they moved a chair up to it. Another thing that was important for me is to have a place where I could work at that would be right around where the freeze dryer was. Aside from the actual prep work where I prep the food to put in the freezer, most of my work is done here in the freeze dryer room with this little pull out tray that I can wipe it clean and put it away and be done with it. One of the great things about being able to put away my work surface was that it wouldn't be collecting stuff, which is a huge pro for me. I didn't want it to look like I was in a professional prep kitchen because this is my office and I want it to look nice. So I was kind of looking for an antique-y feel, and I feel like I got that with the Facebook Marketplace. But I'll put a link in the description of some of these other options that I'll give you that were also backups. If I had not found something in time from Facebook Marketplace, I would have purchased one of these other options. So here are some options that might work for you. I'll put a link in the description below so you don't have to worry about taking notes. One thing I considered was getting something on wheels. I was considering pushing it in and out of the laundry room as I used it and as I needed it, but having something with wheels might be necessary. That could be something that you need. There's a stainless steel rolling cart, there's a plastic rolling cart, like a heavy duty one, and the other option would just be a plain stainless steel prepping table, and you can go with those in a variety of sizes, and they come with wheels and without wheels. So that might be a good option for you guys if you don't need the storage locked away underneath. And if you don't mind the industrial look of it. One thing I would not recommend, absolutely do not put your machine on the floor, because you have this drain bucket right here that you need the water tube to go out and down to. And if this drain bucket is higher than the machine or at the same level of the machine, then the tube is gonna have to go up and over, and you're gonna end up with a lot of backed up stuff and gross fluid inside of the tube to drain the freeze dryer. So you'll wanna go ahead and put it down lower than the machine. So you'll want to have it bumped up a minimum of 2 feet. I like that this is where this height is because I can just squat and look at every single one of these items without having to get way down on the floor. However, the drain is like right here, like an inch up from the bottom, so you'll want it to be lower than the bottom of the machine. Also, you'll need enough table space in order to put the vacuum pump on there because it needs to be level with the machine. I don't know if I'd put it lower. I definitely wouldn't put it higher because I've seen people say that the oil gets back into the machine somehow. I don't know how that works because I have a loop in my tube. So ideally, you're going to have it right next to the machine where you can have that loop in the tube, because if oil gets in it, it's just going to stay there versus having it stretched out or higher or lower. If you need to make a different level, you can put it lower. I definitely wouldn't put it higher though. The third thing to consider is your storage area for your food. You'll need to make sure you have enough room to store the food. You're gonna have Mylar bags or glass jars, which is most likely what you're gonna be using, and you'll need to make sure you have enough room for those things set aside. This could be anywhere in your house, like a pantry, ideally a pantry in your kitchen, if you have an extra pantry, a basement, or even a spare closet in your house. Or, some people store it underneath their furniture, like underneath their nightstands or end tables. No matter what you do, make sure that you have a cool, dry, dark space in order to keep your food in so that it'll last longer. Avoid storing food in damp or humid areas, just so when you're packaging it yourself, you don't want to be in that moist, humid environment either, if at all possible, because that can make your food spoil a lot faster. You'll need to keep your food in an airtight container so that you don't get pests and moisture into your food. Oxygen absorbers and Mylar bags are the very first option that I would select. If you don't have time for that, like I don't, because I've got a busy life with children and a job, then you'll want to get the glass jars that I'll have linked down below. I prefer the half-gallon jars because you can fit a lot more food in there, and for the larger items. And then the next one I would get would be quart-sized jars. I'd probably buy equal amounts of that, maybe 1 case each. Make sure you wash them, dry them, and have them covered, like after they're completely dry. Let them just sit in your dishwasher for like 2 days if you can. And then pull them all out, make sure they're dry, put the lids on them and with the rings, because you want to do that right when it comes out of the freeze dryer, and then you vacuum seal them all at the same time. So keep that in mind to keep your stuff dry and fresh and sealed without the air in there. Number 4, set up an area for storing all the things that you need to run your machine smoothly. These are things like oil, filter, paper towels, the oil filter. So you'll need to make a place for that. I store it underneath my machine. So if I keep all my stuff together, that makes it much easier for me to find. And I keep it over on one side of the machine, and then the other side, I have extra empty bags, like Mylar bags, extra jars and things like that. And then in the middle, I have my jars that I'm still filling, like mushrooms. For some reason, I only have extras of like that much. Every single time I freeze dry it, I just keep the frozen ones and keep adding to it. And I've actually used those already. So I open and reuse that as time goes by. So I'm not going to probably seal those in a Mylar bag. I'll probably just end up keep on using them in our food because we tend to run out. And when we need it, I just pull the jar out and use it. Keep in mind that pets and kids may want to get into your oil, and you definitely don't want that mess. I have had one of my kids spill my oil filter before I put it under the cabinet, and it was not pleasant. Keep that in mind when you're deciding where to store your oil. I chose to add handles onto my storage cabinet because I needed to put the lock through there to keep it childproof so my kids couldn't get into those things. What?
I love you.
I love you too. But you might be able to store them in the garage or underneath the kitchen cabinet or under the sink or something like that as well if you already have the storage space for it. The next thing I would say is either buy or have the money set aside for those glass jars we just discussed, and also a vacuum sealer. I'll put a link in the description below for the one that I use. I've tried some of the cheap knockoffs and they're just not as good as the one I'm going to put down in the link below. The best thing to do is put it in Mylar bags with oxygen absorbers, but that's not always an option. So the second best thing would be to put them inside of a glass jar and then store it until you're ready to put them in the Mylar bags. Or you could store them indefinitely in the glass jars and just make sure that they're in a cool, dry place. And if you have the room for it and you have the room for the weight of the jars, you can definitely put them in there. The freeze-dried food really doesn't weigh hardly anything, so you're not really going to have a worry about the weight of the food itself, just mainly the jars, because those can get quite heavy. If you have the room or the food storage space for it, I think that that's a better option. You'll need to be aware that you need to keep it in a cool, dark, dry place, and that should help you determine where to store it. Number 6, do not buy or prep any extra food. I know it's so tempting. You're fixing to get your freeze dryer. You're super excited. You want to do it, but I would not buy or prep anything until you've run your first bread test. There are several reasons for this. The first is you may not know exactly when your machine is coming in, and even though it may give you an estimate and you may have called the company, there could always be delays. So you don't want to have fresh food on hand ready to put in the freeze dryer just to find out that your machine's not going to be there for another day or 2 or even a week. So definitely keep that in mind. The second thing is that the machine has to sit for 24 hours once it arrives. So you're just killing 24 hours of time on your fresh food going bad. So go ahead and hold off on making that food. The third thing is the bread test is a confirmation that the machine is working properly. I have heard of people starting the bread test and the vacuum didn't work. Like they could not get their machine to vacuum properly. Let it sit for 24 hours, do your bread test. If it comes back perfect, your bread's all crunchy and falling apart as you squish it, then you're ready to do your next cycle. But I wouldn't prep any food because in the unfortunate event that you have to send your machine back, you're gonna end up with a lot of ruined food. So don't prep your food until your machine has passed the bread test. I have a video in my freeze dryer playlist so that you can learn how to do the bread test. It's really easy. Although Harvest Right does test every single one of their freeze dryers before they ship them out, there could be some kind of damage done during shipping or some kind of mechanical malfunction. So you definitely don't want to start that prepping until you know for sure your machine is working. If you have prepped your food in advance, any one of these problems could pop up for you, and I would hate for that food to go to waste. One thing you can do is save all of your extras though. Like if you have extra diced onions or bell peppers or whatever, you can put them into individual Ziploc bags or put it on a cookie sheet, put it in the freezer, and that is easy to break up. I wouldn't do anything that you have to do a sheet with. I have done that before with some marinara sauce, and it was a big mistake because it did not fit on the freeze dryer, and then I couldn't break it apart. So if you have things that you can break apart that are already chopped up, you can freeze those, and those will be great for your first cycle. And in the unfortunate incident something does happen to your machine, you won't have ruined food because it'll already be frozen. Number 7, save for it. A big part of prepping is also prepping your financial future. So I encourage you to save up money for the freeze dryer rather than putting it on a credit card. If you don't already have a full retirement account or a emergency savings plan, I definitely encourage you to put your money there before you save up for your freeze dryer. If you're going to put it on your credit card, don't let it sit and accumulate interest, because that's going to cost a lot more than it would have had you paid cash or paid off your credit card right away before the interest charges hit. Thanks for watching. I hope you like and subscribe.